Hello and welcome to our worship service for Townville Baptist Church for December the 27th. Amazing that we're already at the end of the year. Last week I wished you a Merry Christmas. Christmas has already come and gone. Had a real nice Christmas Eve service, I thought. It was real wonderful to be in the sanctuary that evening, even though it was rainy and nasty outside. And this week, Happy New Year, because the next time we get together, it will be in the new year. We do pray and hope that 2021 will be less drama and less heartache than 2020 has been for our nation as well as for our world. So want to note that offerings have been strong this month. I haven't seen the final tally, but we have a chance of getting back to break even for the year. We have, of course, this week to get offerings in. Many of you have been faithful in mailing them in. And then Lottie Moon, we're in the season of collecting money for international missions and for our Lottie Moon offering. So get those in this week, so they'll be here before the end of the year. I know it's important for many of us for our tax records, etc. So those notes with the new year coming. I'll be finishing up James in this week and next couple of weeks. And then I'm going to be going to the I am statements of Christ. Last Sunday, I looked at just him saying I am out of John chapter 8. But there are 8 of them in John, and the rest of them, he adds some more words to each of them. For example, I am the living water. I am the bread of life. So we'll look at those over the coming weeks as we enter the new year. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the service. I'll be back to you shortly with our time of sermon. Today we're in James chapter 5, verse 7 through 11. Bye-bye.
Jesus ran me. For the Bible tells me so. Let him be wrong. They are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. But the Bible tells me so. Jesus loves me. This I know. For the Bible tell me so. With the one to him belong. Is awake. Yes, he is wrong. Yes, Jesus ran me. Yes, Jesus loves me. For the Bible tells me so. For the Bible tells me so.
Okay, for our sermon time today, James chapter 5, verse 7 through 11. There are 5 chapters in this book, so we're getting towards the end of it. Read verse 7, beginning in verse 7. Be patient, therefore, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. Behold, the farmer waits for the precious produce of the soil, being patient about it, until it gets the early and late rains. You too be patient. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not complain, brethren, against one another, that you yourselves may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing right at the door. As an example, brethren, of suffering and patience, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we count those blessed who endured. You have heard of the endurance of Job, and have seen the outcome of the Lord's dealings, that the Lord is full of compassion and is merciful. May the Lord bless the reading of his word today. Well, the story is told of a 4-year-old girl and her mother on a trip I used to be like the little child when I came to South Carolina to visit my grandmother here, my family here, and the little girl was doing as you would imagine. Mommy, when will we be there? When? And finally the mother says, look, we've got 90 miles to go, and don't ask me again when we'll be there. After a little bit of a silence, the 4-year-old girl said, but will I still be 4 years old when we get there? Many of us have that sort of impatience for the coming of the Lord. James has just finished warning in the previous verses we handled a couple weeks ago, a word of warning to the rich that their time was coming, that they have not been paying people well, they've been treating people poorly, and their time is coming when God is the judge, will show up and set things right. Well, now it seems like James can almost hear his listening audience, the people he's writing the letter to, saying, well, we want God to come back now. Will he come back now? Will he come back now? We want justice now. I want the oppressors to get theirs, right? And I don't want them to get theirs later. I want them to get theirs now. Well, the scripture here says, be patient. Be patient for the coming of the Lord. Patience is defined by dictionary.com, says an ability or willingness to suppress restlessness or annoyance when confronted with a delay. The ability to suppress annoyance or restlessness. The idea here of suppression is the idea of swallowing it, right? A stiff upper lip, as they say in Britain, gutting it out. And yet James forms an analogy which gives you more nuance than that. He has the analogy of farmers. And it said the early and the late rains they're waiting on. Well, in Israel, they had an early season and a late season for rain. The two seasons were October and November was a rainy season. Then they'd have a period of dry. And then in March and April, there would be more rain. And the idea here is waiting on rain. But if any of you been around farming, or I know many of you are farmers, farming is not just a gutting it out, waiting on rain proposition. There's so much that farmers do that I would call active waiting, an active element, preparing the soil, weeding or hoeing, fertilizing, right? Spreading a weed killer, fighting off the deer, fighting off the rabbits, etc. I have a cousin who's got a blueberry farm, and the deer got in there terrible a couple of years ago, just ravaged it. And so fighting off the deer. My daughter Catherine was an example of this a few years ago. She had an assistant job at her company, and she wanted the main job. She didn't want to be the assistant any longer. And I kept telling her, well, be patient. But while you're being patient, be the best assistant you can be, right? There's an active part in that. While you're waiting on the opportunity to arise, there's the preparation for the opportunity. I used to wrestle when I was in high school, and I kind of thought the guy was crazy at the time, but in reflecting, he was doing what you should do. I had a fellow wrestler who wrestled, I think it was 126 was the weight class back then. And so there were few wrestlers in advance of him. And this guy on my wrestling squad would practice moves behind the bench constantly while the other guys are wrestling. He would pretend that he's doing a fireman's carry or the different moves were. And then after he had his match, he might take a swig or two of water and sit on the bench for a few minutes, but then he would go back and practice more moves after he had his one-on-one competition. Constantly doing that well, he wound up being third in the state that year. And it's because he had not been just waiting on his opportunity to get to the state tournament, he was preparing for it. So this has that element. The Bible teaches us over and over again to prepare for things of the Lord. Ephesians 6 has that famous section on put on the full armor of God. And the armor of God is outlining what a Roman soldier would wear, the breastplate, the shield, the sword, the helmet, etc., and things like truth, righteousness, salvation. But in that section it said to gird yourself with this, to put on this. And those are active words. There is active waiting. Think of waiting at the airport for a loved one, maybe a service man or woman coming back from war, and you're there, but you're not just waiting and gutting it out, right? You have your eyes on the tarmac the whole time, looking for the plane to land, and you would have bought some flowers in anticipation, and you're standing by the gate with the flowers at hand, alert the whole time, waiting on them to come. So there's that active part of waiting. And here he's got these things about patience in this section that are active verbs, active things for us to do that have really eternal consequences. Verse 8 has a couple of commands. One of the commands in verse 8 is to strengthen your hearts. In my translation, some translations say establish your heart, the idea of make your heart solid. It's interesting, that's contrasted with the few verses earlier with his word of warning to the rich. Back in verse 5, you rich live luxuriously on the earth, lead a life of wanton pleasure. You have fattened your heart. You have fattened your heart. So they have been fattening their heart, as in the day of slaughter. We're commanded to strengthen our heart, right? And then this idea of being patient is a command there. And we're to be stubbornly, purposefully patient, waiting on the Lord. I failed to mark these. You're going to have to be patient with me while I turn. But Psalm chapter 40, the 40th Psalm, verse 1 through 3. There we go, almost there. Psalm 41 through 3. I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry. He brought me up out of the pit of destruction, out of the miry clay. He set my feet upon the rock, making my footsteps firm. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and will trust in the Lord. This waiting on the Lord, it's not just waiting. It's not just tolerating it, gutting it out. It is the idea of having your eye on Christ as you wait. You're meditating on him. You're trying to grow in the faith as you wait for the day of justice, the day for him to set things right. It's not just waiting. It's waiting intentionally, waiting on the Lord, and then the Lord will do all those things when he comes. The temptation that comes our way is to give up before the goal, to not be patient, to get frustrated with the circumstances that are going on in life. I know I have been very frustrated this year with all that's been going on with COVID and all the drama around the elections, and all those things are frustrating to be part of it. And so you get tempted to give up. There's an old Chinese expression, before half the road is traveled, he runs away. And we have that temptation before we get to the end of the road. But we should be patiently waiting on the Lord all the way to the end. And the harvest of righteousness doesn't come overnight. It is a harvest that happens in our life gradually as we become more and more righteous. Now, the second coming will come quickly, but preparing for the second coming is something that we should be doing and we should be growing in. We should be working on constantly. Let's look at Luke chapter 9, verse 51. Once again, I'm sorry I didn't mark this in advance, but Luke chapter 9, oh man, 8's a big one here. There we go, Luke 9:51. And it came about when the days were approaching for his ascension that he resolutely set his face to go to Jerusalem, or he established his face to go to Jerusalem. Or over in Luke chapter 22, Luke chapter 22, verse 32. Luke 22:32. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail, and you, when once you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. This idea of his face being resolute to the goal of going to the cross, and then here that we would strengthen our brothers, is the same word that we find of for us to establish our hearts, to strengthen our hearts. And Jesus had that sort of stubborn, patient purpose in life. and we should as well. We should be people that have that. And one of the reasons that we should have it is Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 says there's a great cloud of witnesses. That was easy for me to say. But a great cloud of witnesses that are watching and observing. And that's the sense that you get here in James. He said, look, be patient, strengthen your heart, all the way to the end. And then he says, look at the prophets, look at Job, look at them. And this is the reason that he mentions Job and he mentions the prophets, is that they were patient, they were strengthened in heart, and they're watching what we're doing, like Hebrews 12:1 says, that we have this great cloud of witnesses watching how we run the race on earth. You recall in Job's story, we looked at Job's story a little bit earlier in the year in a sermon series, but Satan was cynical about Job, right? He said to God, he said, look, Job is serving you because you're doing all these good things for him. And if you were to take these good things away from Job, Job wouldn't be serving you. And that cynical view of him, he accuses Job of being in it just for the material favors of what happens. And this year, we've had material things slip away from folks and struggles. And we just had a friend of ours who remodeled the house that I live in. He's had COVID and been back and forth to the hospital. Well, he died here on Christmas Day with it. And so, we've got these things that are struggling all around us and struggles that we've had. And, a family member of mine didn't die from COVID but died this week. And all those things can be upsetting, as I know they were upsetting for Job. But he was resolved in following God. He wasn't resolved in patient in not complaining to God. He expressed to God his upset, but he was resolved in his following of God. So we need to be that way, patient in following God. And then here he's got the prophets reference, right? Well, Jesus himself also referenced the prophets as examples for us. Let's look, I'm in Luke here. Let's go back to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, verse 10 through 12. Matthew 5, 10 through 12. And he began to entreat him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there was a big herd of swine feeding there on the mountain. And the demons entreated him, saying, send us into the swine so that we may enter them. And I'm in Mark. I do that live on Sunday mornings. I'm almost tempted to stop this and redo it, but you'll know how I do that even on the recording. So I'm not going to stop it and re-record it. You just get that one. It's Matthew. I was wondering why that sounds so weird. Matthew 5, verse 10 through 12. Blessed are those who've been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when men cast insults at you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely on account of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. He said, look, when the persecutions come, I want you to be patient, to use James' word. And he says, look, they persecuted the prophets before you. So you have the example of the prophets. Take Jeremiah. We know a lot that happened from his life. He was the teenage prophet. And after his first prophecy, his own family tried to kill him. Can you imagine that? I've heard stories. I don't know these people, but I have read accounts of people who are living in a gang family, a mafia family, for example, and they decide to do the right thing and their own family try to kill them. Well, that's what happened with Jeremiah. And then on a feast day in the temple gate, he told the crowd that their worship was worthless because they did not intend to obey. We know we've had a lot of worship here around Christmas, and a lot of people who are worshiping Jesus aren't really wanting to obey Christ. You remember Christ said, my own biological family is not my family. My family is the people who obey me. But there are all sorts of people who go through the motions around the holidays and aren't wanting to obey Christ. And Jeremiah had the nerve to stand up at one of those events and tell them that what they were doing was worthless, right? Well, the religious establishment of the time tried to kill him. Again, tried to kill him. They beat him. They stretched him in stocks. He wrote a book outlining the word of the Lord, and the king burned it. And in depression, he lamented his own birth. Yet God would not allow him to resign as a prophet. And then Zedekiah imprisoned him in a muddy well, a cistern that wasn't quite dry, but it didn't really have water in it. It was a just muddy mess, and God fed him there. And during a siege, Zedekiah summoned him, and Jeremiah kept preaching, obey the Lord, obey the Lord, obey the Lord, obey the Lord. And at the end, Jeremiah was grabbed by Jewish refugees and taken to Egypt. When the Babylonians sacked Jerusalem, they had drug him off to Egypt. I mean, the man lived a tough life, but he was patient. He was devoted no matter what happened. And as James tells us, the rich have been oppressing them. The people oppress us. Rich people oppress us. Not rich people oppress us. Our boss gives us a hard time. Whatever happens in life is oppressive. Life on earth is oppressive. And he says that these folks who the rich were oppressing, he said, be patient. God, the true judge, will set things right. Many times we want to set things right ourselves, but we're not a true judge. We would not judge correctly. It's up to God to be the judge of people on earth. He says that day's coming. Be patient to it and be devoted in the meantime. And so the question really for us, other than just looking at this passage, the question of the day is, how would you explain your devotion level? How would you explain your level of patience? Are you truly strengthened through it? Are you gutting it out? Are you keeping a stiff upper lip? But also, are you doing the things spiritually to strengthen your heart in the middle of that, in the middle of whatever's happening with you? It's been a tough year this year, but God says there is coming a day when everything will be set right. I pray that 2021 will be a lifting of some of the things that are oppressing us this year. For example, if these vaccines prove successful, it will lift the pall of this virus around us. But whatever happens there, we need to know God's the one to set it right. He will at the second coming. And we, in the meantime, are to be strengthening our heart and stay devoted to Him. All right, that's the word of challenge out of this section of James. We'll look more at chapter 5 the next coming weeks and wrap it up. God bless you, and once again, have a happy new year. Bye-bye.